Joining us now for World Brief and the review of some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Adefemi Akinsanya. Good morning, Adefemi.
Good morning, Dr. Rubin. Good morning, Ayo. Good morning, Rufai. Hope everybody's doing well. Let us tell you about what's happening around the world. Utah Senator Mitt Romney, who Rufai has mentioned many times, has again chosen not to endorse Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump, reaffirming his long-standing position and opposition, rather, to Trump. But he's also avoided announcing support for Kamala Harris. He spoke at the University of Utah, and let's take a quick listen to what the senator had to say about his fellow party member.
I made it very clear that I don't want Donald Trump to be the next president of the United States, and you're going to have to do the very difficult calculation of what that would mean.
So short and sweet words there, essentially saying that I'm not supporting that man. Romney, though, he will leave office in January as one of the few Republicans in the Senate who has repeatedly denounced the former president, and as the lone GOP senator who voted to convict Trump during his first impeachment trial in 2020. Meanwhile, Harris has received the endorsement of high-profile Republican figures, including former Wyoming Representative Liz Cheney and her father, former Vice President Dick Cheney, as well as 200 other Republicans. And speaking of Kamala Harris, she has appeared on The View. It's her first live interview since becoming the Democratic nominee. And during the show with the panelists, she answered questions about how she found out about Biden stepping down, on immigration, Donald Trump, of course, as well as her plans for healthcare policy. Let's take a listen.
What I am proposing is that basically what we will do is allow Medicare to cover in-home health care.
Oh. Fine.
Right. So, and because we're talking about these kinds of things where it's just about helping an aging parent or person, prepare a meal, put their sweater on.
Yes.
And it's about dignity for that individual.
And children would all have family members covered. After appearing on The View, Harris then went for an interview on the Howard Stern show where she called Donald Trump a sore loser and received an endorsement from the host. Now, her appearance on the radio show, whose listenership skews white and male, comes as Harris embarks on a series of sit-down interviews on popular talk shows and podcasts, including the Howard Stern show, The View, the podcast Call Her Daddy, which we mentioned yesterday, and the Late Night Show with Stephen Colbert, which she's just finished a few hours ago. Let's move on to the African continent. And Senegal, a former French colony in West Africa, as we all know, has long been seen as a leader of representation of the French language across Francophone African countries. But for how much longer? French does remain the country's official language, inscribed into its constitution, but some reports suggest that its influence is waning. It's giving way to Wolof, the most widely spoken local language in Senegal, and not just on the streets where the latter has always been dominant, but in the halls of power, government offices, university corridors, and mainstream media. In Senegal, there are 25 languages. 6 of them have the status of a national language, but Wolof is largely dominant. Now, out of the population of 17 million people, over 12 million speak Wolof compared to 4 million French speakers. Now, President Faye, who is the youngest elected leader in Africa, was voted in 6 months ago on an anti-establishment platform, and his rise reflected the frustration of the Senegalese youth within the traditional elderly political class. Now, he's made it a point in making all of his official speeches in both languages, French and Wolof, and has pledged to give local languages the primary role in schools, with French introduced later.
I mean, where to go? To be able to support our local languages here, we'll never forget the fact that in Senegal, French is the language of the colonizers. They actually had a language in which they spoke before now. Sure. But also, we must have to be careful about the politics of languages. If you're not trying to put Wolof up there, because yes, it's more pervasive, people from other groups and the 6 other languages will definitely say, okay, why don't you put ours out there? So it's a tough balance in that, and it needs to be able to understand how to balance this. But yeah, this is good, because prior to this time, we were not speaking French, we were not speaking English. English on our shores probably came in the late 1800s, probably after the Berlin Conference and the likes, or even before then, when you had incursions are made into our region. I knew definitely Mitt Romney was not going to endorse Trump. And I'm not surprised because Mitt Romney is not somebody Trump can gag because he was former Massachusetts governor, which he did very well at. And if you go back to the Romney family, it comes from a lot of, if you remember the history of the Romney family and their corporations and all of that his father headed. So, and he's got a set mindset. These are the kind of progressives that people will still pretty much give a chance, probably over Trump, that is very destructive in most of his policies. But my pain with Kamala is this. You can say, yes, she's a good alternative. I'll support her as a better alternative to the other side, Trump. But she's not landing on most of those policies. So take, for instance, these are the questions we keep asking. She wants to increase the scope of Medicare to in-house treatment, which is good. But you have to pay for it. How are you going to pay for it? That's the question the guy from the CBS 60 Minutes was asking her. She said she will go back to Parliament. You have a Parliament that is up in the balance. You might not even, a Congress here, it's a Parliament, Senate that is up in the balance. You might not even gain it totally.
Sure.
Have you looked for other means of funding that you can probably look at? Secondly, have you done the numbers? It's not just by just bopping up corporation taxes. But have you done the numbers? Because you see, the funny thing she fails to realize is, once you bop up the corporation tax for the rich people, they go to tax havens. It was when Trump reduced the corporation taxes that some of them could bring more money and they got more revenue. The rich will always look for ways to be able to look for and to wriggle this money out of the country. So she has to do that, and she has to do a lot more work on the planning. Is how you're going to pay for it. I like the fact that her plan is going to increase deficit by 3.5 trillion and Trump is going to increase deficit. She's going to lower it's not going to be as high as Trump's increasing the deficit. But the question is, she needs to be able to answer the hard question of how you're going to pay for it. And that's where the economists need to come in and give her modeling. Because voting has started already. And her numbers as regards the economy is not always good.
Okay, what are the key issues? First, let me start with Senegal, and let's pay attention. Senegal prides itself as the main francophone center in Africa. You cannot speak to anybody from Senegal, elite class. They will say, oh, la philosophie. They think they are the only ones who understand French. But they have the heritage of Leopold Sédar Senghor, who was their first president, and who was also a poet, and who also was admitted into the French Academy. So if you go to Senegal, French is in their constitution inscribed as the official language. And also, there have been developments in West Africa in recent times. There's been a wave of nationalism and a decline of French influence. In the Francophone countries, what we had was a policy of assimilation. We have now seen these West African countries rebelling against the policy of assimilation in the light of current realities. In Burkina Faso, in Mali, in Niger, you have had some of those countries saying, we don't want French as our local language anymore. But the process is a bit more subtle in Senegal. So in Senegal, you have a president, Faye, who now says, well, Wolof, we should speak our language. So there is nationalism. However, how far can they go? The issue is about the disparity. In Senegal, they have about 39 ethnic languages, but Wolof is spoken by most of the people. But within the education system, the literacy rate is 60%, and you have, 40% of the population that can be reached with, Wolof.
Right.
Yeah. So now you have big boards in Senegal, in Wolof, in French, and all of that. And in 2014, a radio station was established, Sud FM, it is called. As of today, that radio station has 2 million listeners. So that's the issue about that. Where they will keep grappling with it, but it's about nationalism, it's about cultural identity.
Sure.
Ngugi wa Thiong'o once wrote a book called Decolonizing the Mind, which is essentially about the politics of language in Africa. Africans trying to assert themselves through language because language is about cultural identity. Okay. As for Kamala Harris, she was making the rounds yesterday. She was going from one station to the other. In the morning, she was on ABC View.
Yes.
which is a daytime a program on ABC. In the evening, she was on a live show with Stephen Colbert. What has she been able to achieve so far? She's been able to prove that she's not dodging interviews. Less than a month to the elections. 2, she's presenting herself to the electorate to say, this is who I am. Even on Stephen Colbert program, she drank beer. You know, she said, when they go low, we go high.
Right.
And the beer that she chose, she says, this is the champagne of beers. You know, just to connect with the people. In addition to the Call Me Daddy podcast,
yes.
in addition to other appearances. However, most of the issues she dealt with, they're the same issues. About saying, okay, Bob Woodward just wrote a book, War, in which he says, Trump was giving COVID testing machines to Russia surreptitiously, you know, and that was the reality. Trump has denied it, but she made a capital out of it in some of the interviews she granted.
Exactly.
And then secondly, she talked about, is she different? That was on the ABC The View from Biden. She couldn't answer that, but she then said, okay, she will involve other politicians. She may even appoint Republicans. But the summum bonum of it all is that she's trying to sell herself to the public. And the latest New York Times poll, Sierra College poll, says she's leading Trump 49% to 46%. In September, the poll told us they were head-to-head at 47%.
We are vastly on time.
Can I just say something?
Yes.
Just in line with what Dr. Bassey has said with regards to Kamala Harris,
yes,
and finding her own identity. I think that's actually one of the biggest challenges she's facing in this election. And it came up during the Trump debate as well, where he said Harris is Biden. Now, in interviews subsequently, there have been questions around her own policies, where she stands on certain things. So she's in a dilemma. She doesn't want to move too much away from Biden because they're from the same party, and still trying to honor and respect him as president. He still has his base, but also still being able to establish herself as her own person, her own candidate. And that's one of the things she said yesterday during that interview, was that she was going to have a Republican in her cabinet.
Yes.
Who that person would be, we don't know. But it's great to see that she's been able... Who? Who's Chine? Well,
perhaps.
I'm just saying that for me, I think one of the big, and I don't know how she's going to do, she needs something really radical.
Maybe Mitt Romney.
Or maybe Mitt Romney himself, even though he hasn't endorsed her yet.
Well, since he's not going to, he's leaving Senate in January, maybe he's open for work. So it's just to say that for me, something radical needs to happen. It's a dilemma for her. She has less than a month to prove herself to the American people that not only is she not Biden, but she's also her own person and can be President Kamala Harris. That's one of her biggest challenges.
Thank you all. Wonderful analysis from all three of you. Let's move on now to our newspaper headlines from across the globe. We begin here in Nigeria with the front page of This Day. Now, This Day has comments from Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Heineken Lokpobiri, who says the federal government is expecting $50 billion worth of investment before the end of the year. He says that this investment is thanks to President Tinubu revolutionizing the oil sector and making it attractive to local and foreign investors. The New Telegraph stays with oil and reports on the Eni Shell Nigeria trial. Now, an Italian court has sentenced 2 Italian-based prosecutors to 8 months in prison for failing to file documents that would have supported Energy Group Eni, or ENI's, position in an international corruption case. Let's not forget that Eni, Shell, and the defendants were all acquitted in March 2021 in what came to be known as the industry's biggest corruption case, which revolved around the $1.3 billion acquisition of a Nigerian oil field a decade ago. The Punch reports on a new pump price looming as the NNPCL moves to drop the 99 million naira monthly subsidy. Its headline says marketers are to begin direct Dangote petrol purchases. And staying on the Punch, a consortium of investors from South Korea have concluded plans to build 4 100,000 barrel capacity refineries in various locations in Nigeria That's according to the federal government. Moving on to The Guardian now, and The Guardian reports on anxiety being felt as the federal government commits states' funds to special development commissions. It goes on to say that states' internally generated revenue is about 40% of FAAC allocations, and that in the first half of this year, 2024, just over 7 trillion naira was made available to so-called federating entities. The Daily Trust leads with cholera-related deaths on the rise. In Lagos, Jigawa and Kano, all leading in casualties. Some 10,837 suspected cases have been recorded nationwide in 9 months. The Nigerian Center for Disease Control has listed heavy rainfall and open defecation as the causes. Let's move on to African papers now, and let's look at the front page of the Daily Nation in Kenya. And he's gone. Kenyan Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua has been impeached by the country's parliament by a margin of 281 votes to 44, but with 1 abstention. But there is still some fight left. The Senate will now hear the charges and may appoint a special committee to investigate them, while Gachagua or his representatives can respond to these allegations. If at least 2/3 of the Kenyan Senate vote to uphold the impeachment, Gachagua, my friends, will be gone. Moving on to the Daily Graphic of Ghana, and it leads with the president of Ghana's Pentecostal and Charismatic Council calling on political parties to avoid making this year's general election a religious contest, being that you have candidates who are both Christian and from Islamic backgrounds. Also on the front page is the signing of a waste management deal between Nigeria's Zoomillion and a group of German entities worth $40 million. The Daily Mail now of the UK leads with the prospect of Russia plotting mayhem on British soil. That's according to MI5 chief Ken McCallum, who says the Secret Service has one hell of a job to do battling enemies such as Vladimir Putin's henchmen. He also says that there's a staggering terror threat from children, as those as young as 13 are being radicalized. Iran too was mentioned by McCallum, who says that he's also alive to the possibility of Iran targeting Britons on UK soil if the war in the Middle East continues to escalate. And finally, the Wall Street Journal has a beautiful picture story on the skies over Lapland in Finland, thanks to the Northern Lights. Now, solar storms have also made these beautiful phenomena more visible in the north of the United States just recently.
Real quickly, I just want to sound off for one of the stories making the rounds on all the papers that talked about the fact that our FDI had dropped so badly. So what was told to the president in his speech when he said we recorded 30 billion in FDI?
Well,
and the papers are saying, I think there was a paltry sum this morning, our FDI had dropped so badly. So what did the president say in that speech? And who wrote that presidential speech? And who was taking responsibility for that speech? Because it was filled with a lot of porkies away from the margin of reality.
Right, very quickly, also something else in the papers, and has been actually in the news for a while, but because of the elections and what's happening in Rivers State, it's the Edo State elections, and INEC not releasing materials to opposition parties who would need those materials to go to court. They said today that they're going to release the materials to PDP and other parties in the state, but this goes back to the presidential and gubernatorial elections in some states where the same accusation was made, whereby INEC didn't release materials on time. And when this happens, unfortunately, it then casts aspersions on the integrity of the process and on INEC itself. When we talk about elections, part of the challenge is the institution that prosecutes elections. If we don't get it right, we're going to continue to have these challenges. Number one, why was it difficult for them to release the materials to them? Number two, why was it taking so long? So I just wanted to put that out there, that INEC is on trial as well when it comes to elections.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'd like to start with the main story. Well, you took the story from this day, page 26 of this day newspaper today, which is the case about OPL 245.
Yes.
Where we're told that the Brescia court, an Italian court, had committed to prison two prosecutors, Fabio Do Pascal, and Saprado. I hope I got the name of the second person well. Prosecutors who in the OPL 245 case, were concealing evidence. The rule, and I think this should be a lesson to prosecutors in Nigeria, that the Supreme Court of Nigeria, I think in the Bello case, Bello versus the state, I hope I'm correct, had made it clear that a prosecutor is a prosecutor, not a persecutor. And a prosecutor, in any case at all, is supposed to provide in the temple of justice all the relevant evidence in the matter. Fabio Do Pascal and Sparado, they are going to go to jail for 8 months because the Brescia court in Italy discovered that they concealed evidence in the OPL 245 case, a case that was dismissed in UK, dismissed in the US, and dismissed also in Italy. But unfortunately, many members of the Jonathan administration were maligned, including Adoke Bello, Mohamed Adoke Bello, Chief Attorney General of the Federation, for an offense that he did not commit. But look at it. But I think this is vicarious, justice. This is some kind of victory for Adoke Bello and the other parties involved in OPL 245.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Adefemi. Glad that we could review papers today.